Thank you very much. We're going to call the meeting to order. And we'll get started with introductions. I'm Darren Lowndes, Chair of the DD Council and Director of the Housing Consortium of the East Bay.
Hi, my name is Ron Halog. I'm the Executive Director for Corel and also the Vice President of the Council.
Angelique, Futures Explorer Director and family member.
Sandy Holiday, Staff to the Council.
Esther Wong, Consultant.
Fu Wei, Regional Center East Bay.
James Slahee, Family.
Greg King, Family.
Jennifer Yen with Alameda County Tribal Court. Laurel Simmons, Bay Area Court Service.
Good morning. I'm Chair Wahemo from Assemblywoman Buffy Weeks' office. We are newly elected and our office is close by here.
Thank you for coming.
Herb Hastings, RCB Advocate, Council Facebook Administrator. Scott Brooks, Futures Explorer in Livermore.
Sherry McCoy, Senator Nancy Skinner's office. Deborah Pearl, family member.
Pam Pearls, REC, and Contra Costa DD Council.
Kathy Nielsen, East Bay Innovation. Sarah Ingram, Advocate.
Bob, Family.
I'm just going all over here today.
Liliana Ansari, family member. Chris Hansen, Regional Center of the East Bay.
Bill Pelter, Ability Now, Bay Area.
Eva Manuelos, La Familia.
Cornelio Berry, family. Livermore.
Lisa Kleinbuck, Regional Center of the East Bay.
Angel Marshall, State Council on Developmental Disabilities.
Will Sanford, Futures Explored.
Lester Gonzalo, Ability Now, Bay Area.
Carol Fitzgerald, parent.
Gabriel Chess, client.
Mary Thomas, Futures Explored in Livermore.
Keith Shikori, Futures Explored in Livermore. Chris Ashton, Fisher.
John Peter McGrath, filling in for my mom today because she is at work. My mom's name is Dolly McGrath. She would love to come here, but she's got work. So I'm filling in for her. Thank you.
Kyle Kermanis, Futures Explored.
Did I get everyone? Yes, I think so.
Andy? Okay, on to the President's report. So the East Bay Coalition Legislative Breakfast is coming up on February 1st. We would love to have members consider the time to come to that event and participate. Enjoy breakfast, sit with an elected and tell them about our needs and our wants and our wishes for 2019. You can RSVP to Sandy for that. And Happy New Year. I'm hopeful that due to our legislative breakfast and all of our efforts over the year that the 2019 brings new resources and opportunities for our community. That's all I have for now. Coordinator? Sure.
Excuse me, what's the tax
You do have quorum. Great. We'll move on to the minutes and then we'll come back to the coordinator's report. Please take a moment to look in your packets for the minutes of December 12th, 2018. Please raise your hand if you have comments or suggested edits. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to pass when ready. Great. Motion to pass the minutes or approve the minutes by Ron Haylock. Is there a second? Bill Pelter. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of passing, approving the minutes of December 12th, 2018, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Show by hands. Okay, Aaron abstained. Any further? Okay, thank you very much. The minutes pass. And you're ready.
Sorry. It's great to be here. It's great to see live human beings in the Bay Area. You're enjoying some wonderful weather. Believe it or not, it's much warmer compared to where I came from. I just want you to know that just a reminder, the Alameda County Transition Fair is scheduled for Saturday, March 23rd. Service provider invitations went out on January 7th. So you should, if you're a service provider, you should be receiving those soon. If you don't get those by Monday, please shoot me an email or give me a call. Family registration forms should be ready February 1st. That is the goal anyway. Please note the information on the back table, including the Employment is an Option conference. It's on schedule for February 2nd in Contra Costa County. Also, I did send this out, but there is a wonderful job opening at Castro Valley Adult Ed, the STRIDES program. It's a 30-hour job working with adults with disabilities. So if anyone is looking for a job, I think that would be a cherry position. I also forwarded today a notice from Marty Emoto. Thank you, Will, for pointing that out. The new state treasurer, Fiona Ma, announced an affordable housing listening tour, and that's scheduled for Friday, January 18th at the Recology Golden Gate in San Francisco. They would like you to register. I will write the website up there to register, but I think that everyone from the disability community should show up for that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to inform the new administration. And I think that's it. Thank you, Darren.
Thanks, Sandy. Any questions for the president or coordinator's report? Great. Seeing none, we're going to move into our presentation, and we'll have Sandy introduce our speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, Ron, you're going to move. Thank you very much. I'm going to call up our two speakers. We're very lucky to have Scott Miller from Congressman Eric Swalwell's office and Matthew Jorgens from Assemblymember Hanson Chu's office. They're going to talk about the legislative processes. New board members, which I'm very happy to say have asked to know more about the legislative processes. One of the main reasons, one of the main goals of the council is to advocate. So we need to know how best to advocate with our local offices. So, gentlemen, grab a seat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And your mic and ready to go? And
We should be.
let's see. You'll still need this. And you can, when you're ready, Matthew, just turn that on, okay? Great, thank you.
Perfect. Well, good morning. Thank you for having us here to help explain the legislative process and hopefully help you guys meet with your local elected officials and speak with them as efficiently and as effectively as possible. My name's Scott. Again, I'm a constituent service representative for Congressman Eric Swalwell in the House of Representatives.
I'm Matthew Jorgens. I'm a field representative with Assemblymember Hanson Chu.
So I'll start off going over kind of a brief outline of the federal legislative process, what happens in Congress. I'll also try to give you some tips and tricks that I spent a year in Washington, D.C. before I moved out here, back here to California to work in this office. So based on what I saw in our D.C. office, I'll try to give you some helpful advice from what I saw there. And then Matthew will take it away with the variations on the legislative process in the state of California. So for the federal level, of course, legislation starts in Congress. There are, of course, those two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. I apologize also if I bore any of you going over some of this information. I'm sure you're all experts, but just wanted to give a quick rundown from beginning to end. So, of course, within the Senate, you have 100 senators. Each senator has a pretty large amount of influence over the legislative process within that chamber. Versus representatives, there are 435 voting members of the House of Representatives. Each individual member has less effective power to completely change the course of the legislative process, but with 435 members, each representing a smaller part of the country, it's easier to build a national coalition of members and groups across the country and get things moving kind of as a larger movement in the House. So in both chambers, any member can introduce a bill to the floor. Once that's introduced, it's going to be referred off to a committee or multiple committees, and that's where the work really gets done. The committee is then going to debate the contents of the bill. They're going to bring in experts to discuss the bill, and they're going to amend the bill right there. Well, the member who introduced it, of course, it had the version of the bill that they wanted to be introduced, passed. Committees are almost always going to change things around. One of the most common types of amendments you'll see in a committee is called an amendment in the nature of a substitution. That's where literally, let's say I introduce HR 17. They say, okay, we're going to keep the number HR 17. We're going to completely change all the language you have in that bill. And they're going to rewrite the entire thing. That is the normal process. They're going to change the entire context of the bill, because that gives them more room to then amend it from there due to the different rules about amending throughout the House process. Same thing's going to be happening in the Senate. They're going to get it to a committee. The committee's going to offer an amendment in the nature of substitution, and they're going to work with it from there. Once the committee has agreed that they've created the language of the bill that they want to then present to the House floor, they'll do that. They will refer it back to the House floor with a recommendation to vote for it, and that's where the floor debate process then begins. And that's really where the Senate and the House of Representatives take two very different approaches to it. I'm not an expert on Senate procedure, so if I say anything wrong over there, please don't come after me. Generally, what happens over there is when a senator wants to bring a committee-approved bill to the floor, they'll ask for unanimous consent that it be brought up, considered, and voted on. The key word there being unanimous consent. One senator can stand up, object, and stop the entire fast-track process. And then they have to debate on the prospect of even discussing that bill on the floor. House of Representatives is a little different. Technically, there are over a dozen ways you can bring a bill to a floor. Only 3 are used nowadays. First being a discharge petition. That's very rare, but that's when 218 members of the House all sign a petition saying it's time to vote, take a vote on this bill. Again, very rare because you have to bring 218 members together at the same time. And usually it's used by the minority party in the House because the majority is going to bring forth bills that they want to vote on anyway. The second way, which is the most common, though you don't hear about it very much, is passage under the suspension of the rules. So for bills with broad consensus across the House of Representatives, a member will get up, they'll ask that the House suspend all the other rules and vote on the passage of whatever bill they want. Usually there's no chance for amending the bill at that point. The member who wants to suspend the rules is going to tell the rest of the House, let's discuss this and let's vote on it in this context. So they can either say the bill as introduced, the bill as amended in the Judiciary Committee, what have you. They could even say, the bill that I just marked up right here in the past 5 minutes, I want the House to vote on this. From that point, they'll usually have an hour of debate going back and forth between the two parties. And at the end, they'll have a vote, yea or nay. For suspension of the rules, they do need to have 2/3 of the House agree to passage. It's not just a simple majority. That's why you need a broad coalition, broad support across the House to pass something under suspension of the rules. So the last way that bills are typically brought to the floor, the one you hear about most common, is through the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee will write a specific rule to consider that specific bill. They'll then ask the House to approve that rule as a new rule for Congress. They will literally say, we want everyone to agree that there's going to be a rule to specifically talk about HR 17. The House will vote yes or no. Within that rule, they set the guidelines for debate. They set the guidelines for amending the bill when it's on the floor. And sometimes they'll dictate, we need 2/3 passage, what have you there. So they can either allow debate and bills to be introduced, however members want them to be introduced. That's a member's final chance to get their own say into the bill. Usually they're going to say, let's consider this bill with these 3 specific amendments. And then the House will debate those 3 specific amendments. And then based on voting on those 3, then they'll get the final bill with or without each of those 3 amendments. If the House passes it through any of those processes, if the Senate comes through unanimous consent to continue, or they invoke cloture to end debate and vote on a bill, it will then get tossed to the other chamber. The other chamber then starts the process all over again. It goes to a committee, it gets amended, it goes to the floor, it might get amended. As soon as the same bill, down to the same spacing in between words, is passed by both chambers, it goes off to the president for his or her signature. If there's even one small change, if the Senate passed something with a semicolon and the House passed it with a comma, it has to go to the other chamber to get approved again. With that discrepancy between the 2 chambers, there's one of 2 ways that they'll resolve those differences. They'll either convene a conference committee, in which you'll get a certain number of representatives in that committee and a certain number of senators in that committee, and they'll debate which version of the bill they want to pass. That's your last opportunity to amend the bill, because they can change it however they want once they're in that committee. Usually it's just going to be minor changes again, semicolon or comma. Do we want to spend $1,500 or $1,501, something like that. The other way they'll reconcile their differences is just play ping pong between the 2 chambers. So the House says, no, we want a comma, they'll send it back to the Senate. The Senate will say, well, we'll take the comma, but we want a semicolon here, and they'll bounce it back to the House. And that can go on up to 3 times, I believe, before that bill is at the end of its life cycle. Typically, it doesn't get to that point, though. It'll go to conference committee if they're serious about passing that bill. So that's the overview of kind of all the steps within the legislative process to get the legislation off to the president's desk. Now, some hopefully useful tricks for you when meeting with federal officials. First of all, always be sure to go to your own member of Congress, whether they're supporting the legislation you want or whether they're opposing it. Make sure to always voice your opinion to your own representative. It's very important for us staff to take as good tally of support and of opposition to each bill our member is voting on or working on as we can. So if your member of Congress is the one who introduced the bill that you want to see passed, still give them a phone call, still write them a letter, still go to their office, let them know we have support, or we support your actions. Because then the member of Congress, when they're debating it in committee or on the House floor, they can say, 70% of my district wants to see this happen. Same thing with opposition. If your member is the one who introduced the bill that you oppose, still give them a call, still give them a letter, because that member wants to know, well, I shouldn't say all members, most members want to know if their community doesn't feel supportive of their actions. Because then they have to seriously think about what they're proposing, what actions they're taking. They might still go with that option that you don't like, but they'll at least have to defend their position then, and they won't just be introducing the bill, running with it willy-nilly. So in addition to reaching out to your own member of Congress, If you want to reach out to other members, focus on the members who are on the committees that bill is being debated in. Again, they're the ones with the most power to amend the bill. They're the ones with first eyes on any amendments and debate on that bill. So feel free to reach out to those members. Try to set up a meeting, make a phone call, what have you. When you're meeting with someone who you're not from their district, they still take many members still take meetings with people outside their district. Some refuse to do so, but that's more the exception than the rule. Try to still draw some connection to the district that they represent, because of course, we represent Hayward, Pleasanton, Livermore. If someone from Salt Lake City, Utah comes to speak with us about an issue, we'll listen to them, we understand their concerns, but we represent Hayward, Pleasanton, Livermore, not Salt Lake City. But if you draw that connection to that area, you know, in the context of your guys' work, you know, your area has this many people with developmental disabilities, this bill would help them this way. That's going to draw that connection in. That's going to make it more of a sticking point for that member. If you have, you know, if you go to, say, Washington as a group, and you have someone from that particular district, well, that's an easy check. That's an easy box to check for you. You have a direct connection to that district, but, you know, letting people know this bill will affect your constituents in this way or that way is also going to achieve that effect. When you're in DC or meeting here in California, or I'm sure even in Sacramento, if the member isn't available to meet with you, don't take it as a personal offense. They have very busy schedules. They want to meet with you guys, but it could just be they have their committee work to get on, and you know they're just swamped with work to do. We staffers always make sure to relay all your information along to our members, so that they are as informed about what you guys are fighting for as they can. Always feel free to share with us as many of the boring facts, figures, and numbers as you want. That actually helps us. If we only have 30 seconds with our member to tell them about HR 17, facts and figures are the fastest thing we can do to plant some thoughts into their head. But also bring personal stories. If you know a personal story, an individual or a family being affected by a bill or a condition, share that with us. Because if we get a minute, we'll share that story. That way, again, that member really knows the effects of what they're working on. If you're speaking directly with the member, definitely then have that personal story, that personal touch. Some members love numbers and they're just data whizzes. But a lot of members like to know the direct impact of current policies that are affecting their constituents and how they can change it, or the changes that they're trying to introduce and vote on. So those are kind of my biggest tips. Again, I hope I didn't bore you guys too much with that overview. I'll turn it over to Matthew for the state end of things.
Before we move on, thank you for waiting with your questions. Before we move on, do you have any questions for Scott about the federal legislative process?
Sure.
Okay.
I do.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Ron did.
Oh, great.
Right. And so I know that a lot of times we tell our people to make phone calls to your offices.
Mm-hmm.
How effective is that? Where does that really go to?
So that phone calls are probably the most effective way to reach out to your members if you're not looking to meet with staff, because those get logged right away. Letters take some time to go through the mail. Emails build up very quickly, and our legislative correspondent in Washington, D.C. might not be able to get through them all within a day. So phone calls, when you're talking with someone on the phone, those are being recorded into our internal system, again, right away for you. I think most offices use a computer system nowadays to log phone calls that are coming in. That way it's fast, accessible in our Washington office or our California office. Those get tallied up, the computer automatically. We always put in the pro or con codes as much as we can. That way we can very quickly kind of tally. Again, for that quick reference, if we only have 15 seconds, we want to just let them know 200,000 people support it, only 50,000 people oppose this legislation. we don't just write 2 words and then pro or con usually. We'll do that kind of as the subject line in our entry, and then we'll go into the discussion of what you guys talked about. Those do go to the members of Congress, or at least my member of Congress. Those do get presented to him. He sees what people are writing in, calling in about. So phone calls are the fastest way for you, both for you. You can just pick up the phone and talk to someone, and they get recorded the fastest, put it into our system for us staff to take a look at, and also for our member to look at. Yeah.
Not really a question, but just to validate what you were talking about meeting with a couple of points about meeting with staffers. I travel to DC once a year during Rare Disease Week to advocate for funding for a research project for tuberous sclerosis, and 90% of the time we meet with staffers, and it's been a great success, and I can definitely vouch for that the message gets to the representatives. The other thing is that because there are only usually 2 of us traveling there from California, 1 or 2, throughout the year we collect letters from constituents and make sure there's a picture of the kids on the letter, or just kind of like almost like a flyer. And even if we're meeting with a staffer or representative that's not from our district, we bring letters from constituents, and that seems to be just as effective. So.
Exactly. That's.
And Eric Swalwell is always a great person to meet with. He's a great supporter.
I would like to second that.
Yeah.
That's good. Excellent.
Thank you, Guy Houston, Mission Hope in Dublin. Life cycle of the legislative process. You mentioned that, and so can you explain what is the best time? When do you speak to a member to get an idea to go forward? And then secondarily, Congressman Swalwell, how many bills does he submit a year? I know it all varies, but how many average does he submit in a year or in a cycle?
Yeah, so to answer that second question first, I want to say maybe a dozen or so bills he introduces personally, but he's co-sponsoring over 100 bills at least each set. No, more than that. Usually hundreds of bills within each 2-year Congress. And that's just because, you know, we have 8 staffers in DC, so we can only do the research and really write a good, strong bill a certain number of times. But all the members across all 435, they're all working on legislation. So everyone's taking a different stab at things. And so we'll sign on, we'll co-sponsor their legislation so that it's known that we're going to advocate for it, and we're going to advocate for it with other members of Congress as much as we can. To answer the first part of your question, life cycle of a bill, most of the time you want to put a little pressure on when it's first introduced, put more pressure on if you're keeping up with committee actions. When that bill's going to be before the committee for debate, that's a good time to pressure especially those committee members, because again, they're the ones who are considering it. Usually they're the ones who give the up or down if it's going to go to the House floor for debate. And once it's on the House floor, I say free for all. And call people, get them to vote for it. Just all full speed ahead. Now for the actual life of the bill, well actually let me caveat as well right now. There's appropriations season, which happens about late February, March of every year. Still meet with members about the bills you want them to work on. As a staffer, I ask that you keep us in mind. There are dozens, there's a myriad of appropriations amendments and bills that get introduced during those couple months. So if it seems your member isn't focusing on those, on other pieces of legislation other than appropriations, understand it's just that season. They want to, in a normal world, they're trying to get a budget ready to go, pass, so that we don't have to deal with government shutdown. Other than that, broader life cycle of a bill. Of course, each piece of legislation expires at the end of a Congress. So every 2 years, bills have to be reintroduced and renewed. If a bill gets introduced that's really solid and really good, and then it kind of fades out in committee, that's okay. Not a frequent saying, but a common saying on the Hill is it can take 3 Congresses to pass a piece of legislation. First time it's introduced, the committee kind of dabbles in it, kind of lets it go. Second time it gets introduced, the committee takes a more serious look at it. They really amend it to try to get it ready to go. They send it to the House floor, but it kind of fades on the House floor. That third time though, because the committee's already done most of the work, it's going to get through the committee rather quickly, and it's going to get to the House floor for a long enough time that people will definitely bring it up for consideration and hopefully pass it. That's not all legislation. There's plenty of legislation that gets introduced, the committee works on it, it gets passed by the House, Senate, Congress within a few months. But again, please don't be surprised if it can take three Congresses, especially for something that's not enough members see as an emergency and an important piece.
Last quick question is there a list on the website of the bills that the congressman has sponsored, co-sponsored, so that we know which ones to know what his interest is, we can really advocate for certain ones?
So we try to keep up on our own website as much as we can, but depending on the press day, we might not keep that completely up to date. Congress.gov is going to be your most frequently updated website for pieces of legislation. You can search based off sponsor or co-sponsor. So you can click check sponsor, type Eric Swalwell. You'll see all the legislation he's introduced this Congress. You can go to previous Congresses. You can also check for co-sponsorships.
Scott, thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Linda in 1 second, but I just want to throw this out. If you would like to comment, just if you would like to feel comfortable on the state of the state, I'm sure we might be interested in hearing that from you. And also, we'll look up Congressman Swalwell's bills, but are there any favorites?
So right now, due to the Russia investigation in particular, his favorite bills are duty to report and it was embarrassing. It was one of the first bills he introduced, and I'm blanking on the name.
It'll come to you, believe me, when you get to be my age, you have to figure it out.
Exactly. But the Protect Our Democracy Act, those are kind of the top ones from this previous cycle to try to protect our democracy, make sure that the gears of our government work the way that our Constitution and us Americans want it to operate without a lot of foreign influence derailing it. He sees that as a crux to making sure the rest of the legislative and political processes continue to function appropriately, and we don't have, further tensions growing in this country. So those, I'd say, were his favorite from this past cycle. But he introduced a lot more, and he's introduced a lot more. But I'll end it there.
So apart from legislation, do legislators have any influence whatsoever on policies of outfits like CMS? We're all dealing with the policies in regard to services and supports for people with developmental disabilities that are set by these agencies. And I know it's separate from the legislative process, but do legislators have any influence on those sorts of policies at all?
They do. Their influence will wax and wane depending on who's in charge of particular federal agencies. But what they'll do is members of Congress love to write letters to directors, secretaries of different agencies. Oftentimes it will be in the context of a proposed rule change or a new regulation. They will, usually as a coalition, they'll come together, write a letter to the director of that agency making that decision to let them know, hey, we support your decision because of X, Y, Z, or we don't support your decision because it will harm our constituents in this way. They do sometimes write letters asking them to create new policies, not just based on current, thoughts being discussed, but please please consider making this change because it's going to help our constituents in this way. I apologize, I'm blanking on some of those types of letters our office has helped join with other members of Congress on, the ones asking for new measures, but that does happen as well. Usually for those letters, just as an insider peek, certain members of Congress tend to have the initiative for certain particular regulations or issue areas. It's not that like Congressman Swalwell does not want to write the letter or sign on to the letter. Usually we want to sign on to that letter. But say Speaker Pelosi is usually the one who writes the letter every Congress, or usually writes letters about this issue area. So if you know a member has had a history of writing a letter on a particular topic, it's usually effective to contact that member, make sure that they're still writing that letter, or bring up a new idea for a letter in that subject area. But from there, contact your member of Congress, ask them to sign on to that letter. The more members you get onto a letter, of course, the more influence it's going to have over that director. And call other members too. Again, just keep that connection to their district, and they'll be all ears for you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Scott. I do want to mention an example of one of those great letters, which I think we should all remember what he said about that, was a letter that Tammy Duckworth from my home state of Illinois introduced last year about the ADA. Ron, was it HR 620? Was it a letter in regards to that? Yeah, for an ADA notification bill. And then I can't remember if the congressman signed on, but we had a conversation, our county lobbyist, with Senator Feinstein's office, because the fear was that she was not going to sign on, but she did. So I think those letters are powerful, and it's something the council should remember in regards to advocacy efforts. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to Matthew. Thank you.
I'm Matthew Jorgens. I'm a field representative in Assemblymember Kingston Chu's office. And if he didn't bore you, I get to be the one that bores you because the California legislative process is really similar to the federal process. So I'm just going to highlight a couple key differences. Big one is the two houses are the Assembly and the Senate. There's 80 Assembly members, 40 senators. And what that means for advocates is that you really have two people that are local in your community that you can reach out to advocate for legislation. And like with your member of Congress, it's good to reach out to whoever your assembly member and your senator is, and that's going to be your most effective path. Another big change is the committee process. In California, most bills will need to go through two committees. One would be a policy committee, like Human Services or Health or whatever policy is relevant to the bill. The other one is appropriations, and the bill would need to be funded. So you might guess that's where a lot of bills can stall out. So when you're trying to get involved in the process, that appropriation step is a good place to get involved. And depending on the bill's needs, it's good to reach out to the bill's author to see, okay, I want to write a letter of support on behalf of this bill. What should be in it? What's going to be the opposition? Who should I send it to? Things like that, because a lot of bills do stall out in appropriations. And when the governor releases his budget in January, you're going to you will be able to get a sense of, is that process going to be difficult or very difficult? So yeah, I just want to repeat a lot of what you said. Phone calls, again, it's a great way to get involved with your state legislators as well. Probably the best way, in addition to what you said about the speed of getting it into the system. It's also a personal story. It's, as a staffer, I'm going to remember that. If my boss gives me the minute instead of the 15 seconds, that's a story that's going to be on the front of my head. If you just email it and I enter it into the system, it probably wouldn't be on the front of my head.
Understood, thank you. I think another term we use for the Appropriations Committee is the graveyard. That's where a lot of our bills die. But would you also like to speak to, I know the committee chairs were just named, would you like to speak to Assemblymember Chu's great interest? I think public safety is one, isn't it? No? I thought it was. Maybe I'm not remembering. Well, help me out.
I memorized all of the committee chairs.
I thought that was his interest. Actually, if anyone saw how many of you saw the PVAC announcement that Geneva sent out yesterday? Geneva's not here, our co-chair of our Provider Vendor Association. Did you see that? There are some real safety issues that are coming up in our community, and so service providers are going to have that discussion on Friday about some of the things that are coming out, how individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are victimized. And I thought that was an issue for Assemblymember Chu. Any questions for Matthew?
My question, yes, I've been on this committee for a number of years. After a number of years, no, at least 15 or 20 years, we have a legislative committee that faithfully brings various bills to council for us to discuss and vote on, and sometimes to send letters of support that, oftentimes at the end of the bill, you actually see it. So we have a very active council. But you just mentioned something very quickly, and I want to make sure that I have it. You said that if we send a letter or an issue, that I wasn't clear. You were saying that if we contacted your office, you would tell us how to highlight it in the most effective way or something like that. You went through really fast, and as a former teacher, I like to write it down.
Yeah, with support letters, it can be most effective to contact the bill's author. That's really going to be supporting, because the bill's author, that office will know kind of what opposition to expect, whether it's in the policy committee or the appropriations committee. So when you write the letter, you can tailor it to say, okay, well, this bill's in trouble for this reason. Here's why that's, that reason's not as important as getting this bill passed. So you can tailor it a little more specifically to what potential opposition exists. And also, it can help highlight different things that are important in the bill. So.
Thank you very much.
On the federal perspective, I wonder if you could share any ways that the shutdown currently is impacting our community. I've heard food stamps are kind of problematic at this point for people, and that's something that will be coming to our community. I'm wondering what else there would be.
So I'll start with hopefully good news in that a lot of the automated payments that the federal government was making will continue regardless of that agency's operational status right now. So Social Security, Medicare, those are operating as normal. A lot of the issues that we're going to be seeing pretty quickly now, it is in terms of food stamps, income assistance, programs like that, because departments like Agriculture, Treasury, Commerce, those are the ones that have been affected by the shutdown. My boss and most members in, I think, both chambers of Congress are trying to work diligently to get things reopened before we actually do start to see these, the hardest detrimental effects. There has already been negative impacts, not just on the economy, but on individual people's lives. So we're trying to get something through to reopen Commerce, Agriculture, Treasury. We're trying to help fund DHS and just push the main debate that's been closed, keeping the government closed. We're trying to push that off so that Homeland Security, safety for our communities, TSA, Border Patrol, Coast Guard, doesn't reopen. So, fingers crossed.
This is
take
on
it
this
through
issue.
quickly.
Yeah, on the same issue, because one of the departments that is closed down is those that approve work authorizations for people who are here in this country legally and have a work authorization that's about to expire. And there is no service. If you go to the E-Verify website, you get a big red E-Verify, and that's all there is. So it's one of the questions, how is that going to impact folks who often work for many of our organizations who may be on a work authorization that's going to expire? I mean, and that's sort of the question of the day for many of us, as well as those of us who participate in E-Verify. It doesn't also exist. So we're hiring people and having to wait that process. So there's a huge potential impact on workforce for folks. And are there things that should people be contacting their local representatives related to those type of issues?
Definitely feel free to reach out to us, particularly with E-Verify, any immigration sort of matter, legal residence, that sort of stuff. Honest, so I don't handle Department of State immigration issues for our office, but I work closely with our two staffers who do. They're in the dark right now as well. What steps we can take to make sure things like your employment authorization form that's expiring, we'll go with Friday, gets reauthorized so that you can continue to work here legally. Won't go into that right now. So we're trying to find the steps. Any fee, I do want to mention any fee-based service at either Homeland Security or the Department of State. Those are continuing to function as normal because they get their funding through fees, or at least they tell us that they're functioning like normal. But it's a lot of these non-fee oriented services that are closed, like E-Verify. So if you're affected by it, if you know someone who's affected by it, have them reach out to us. That way we can, as we're keeping an eye, when things change, we can hopefully reach out to them, let them know, hey, you're ready to go now. Submit your submit your documents, what have you. But again, we're still trying to find a little more guidance on making sure people maintain their legal status in this country as well.
Thank you. Dina has a question.
People trying to get on the ABLE Act. That's a new program that just coming out for a lot of us disabilities. I'm one that is now going for it because a lot of us right now are becoming unfortunate because our families have to come in and support us, and it makes it really difficult. Will that ABLE Act come more out? The California Act?
So
State program.
State program.
State program?
I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, so I can use my card and get back to you on that.
It's active as of December 18th.
Well, I've already signed up for it.
That's what I thought. I didn't want to give wrong information.
Okay, my name is Mr. Washington. And I've started a can of worms, I think. My name is Herb Hastings. I'm the advocate for the Regional Center East Bay for both Contra Costa and Alameda County. Mine has to do with the minimum wage situation. It sounds a little awkward. It's backwards. Okay, we worked for years and years to increase minimum wage. Well, I'm very knowledgeable about the SSDI individuals being one, and I want to look at trying to increase the GSA. So if anything, because it sounds not like it's going to have effect anyway. It will. Yeah, the SGA. Yeah, the SGA. And it's going to affect the individuals because those of us that are on it need Medicare, need all the assistance that we currently get. And fortunately, my current employer is willing to work with the circumstance, but because of circumstances, people that want to work are losing days of opportunity of working. So I'm gonna speak with you after.
Yes, please do. Yes.
I'll take it. Anyone? Another question?
I'll take it.
All right, Rob. Did I ask something?
No.
And so Scott, this has to do with the DIA, Disability Integration Act, and also the Empowerment, or now we'll call it the Improved Act. We're looking for sponsors, co-sponsors on this one, and I know on the 15th, ADAPT and Nickel are going to be having this watch party to try to get as many of our legislators to be part of it. And it's a reintroduction of the bill. How would we go about encouraging our legislators to be a co-sponsor for it?
So, of course, meeting with them, meeting with staff, trying to meet with the member, making those phone calls, that's of course a very effective way. One of the best ways to go about it. Showing the bipartisan support, of course, is important. The word I'm trying to find. Just helping to show, explain the deep and the widespread impact of that legislation usually goes a long way to helping find co-sponsors. I definitely want to speak with you about it later as well, so that I can send details off to my colleagues in Washington, I think, or sorry, we've had a shuffle in DC recently. Can't remember who's handling that portfolio right now.
Definitely, and these bills, I know that the congressman's already co-sponsored these bills in the past, so they're just being reintroduced again. There's also the READY Act that we're trying to track for emergency preparedness, and so these are just items that we're hoping that we can, because we've been affected by these wildfires, floods, earthquakes, and everything here. California's a perfect spot to be one of the areas to get funding, to get supports for people with disabilities and also seniors.
Yeah. So I unfortunately don't know enough about the nuances of other offices, how they do their meetings and pass them along. So for our office, for our office in particular, of course, every organization, every person meeting with us is important to take their voice. When we see multiple large organizations coming together for a particular piece of legislation, that's very effective with us. So I'm assuming that's effective with other members as well. So again, this is just me hypothesizing, so please excuse my long ramblings. If you happen to do say Washington Day, where you're in DC, if it's possible to get multiple groups together at the same meeting, that's even more impactful. Because if, let's say, 3 of your organizations are all in Washington at the same time, but you have meetings at 3 separate times, yes, of course, that's effective. But if you meet together and you really coordinate your narrative, and you kind of bounce off of each other during the conversation. I was a staff assistant out there. I was in the front lobby area where all the meetings happened, so I got to eavesdrop on all of them. When everyone in that group was bouncing back and forth with each other and really applying the pressure as a group, for me, and I know for the staff who are taking the meeting, that was always very effective at presenting the argument. Instead of one group coming in 3 hours later saying, well, I'm pretty sure earlier today you met with, you met with Krill and they probably said this. Still effective, but having this really organized effort is very effective out there. At least for me and our staff. I hope I can be speaking for other staffs, but I can't necessarily. So.
Yeah, that's great. I know that Alameda County recognizes that we are ill-prepared to address the needs of people with disabilities and seniors in a disaster I know that's a priority for Assemblymember 2. I've had that conversation with him, and I'm just interjecting this because I just remembered and I forgot that I sent this out yesterday, but tomorrow is the last meeting of the UASI Ad Hoc Committee. They will be meeting in the supervisor's office, 1221 Oak Street, 5th floor, tomorrow, and I've submitted a written proposal for an access and functional needs coordinator because our county lacks one. And we really need more funding in regards to both the preparation and resources for people with disabilities and disasters. So if you can go and just comment and talk about the need, because I think every emergency manager in every county that was affected by a disaster and wildfire understands that they are ill-prepared to address our population, and there needs to be more funding. Thank you, that was my little PSA for the day. And Irene has a question.
Yes, I have a comment and a question, and my comment is, first of all, to thank Scott Miller for all the work over the last year, more than a year, that he and the person before you did on my son's behalf regarding an issue that we had with SSI, or a series of issues. Scott was able to assist with finding out information from SSI, the Social Security office, regarding that they weren't telling me, and it just kind of went on and on and on. So it took a full year to resolve, and connected with that, because I do believe this is one of the main challenges for families with individuals with developmental disabilities who have their sons or daughters or family members on SSI, that there are just so many bureaucratic things that come up with SSI, and the amount of time that it took me and the amount of time that Scott put in to resolve this is incredible, and I'm more aware and able to respond to bureaucracies than many families are. I think it's a system that does not work well and does not serve our families and the individuals that are using those resources. And so I don't know if after that long experience, if there are ideas of what we could do to improve that, so that benefits to individuals are more streamlined and the communication is clearer and it's more effectively administered. So do you have thoughts on that? And also, I really want to say thank you. I mean, you hung in there for months. I don't know, our email stream was, I don't know how many emails, how many documents. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was, I'm still slightly confused on my end, but I think we were able to finally figure out the main issue at hand.
Well, there were many.
There were.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we found the end of that rabbit hole.
Yes.
So I do have a lot of thoughts about it, but I will whittle them down to I've passed along to our team in DC the complications and the frustrations that have arisen, not just with your family, but I've tried to help other families as well with a similar situation. We're trying to see what steps we can take while respecting the fact that we are the legislature. We're not in the executive branch, so their internal they're free to do their own internal structure and programming without necessarily throwing a lot of legislation at them to say you're going to do exactly this and that. That's an option. We're exploring that avenue. I'll leave it at that before I rant and ramble on.
Well, I want to thank you again, and just so people know that some of the issues were, at one point my son was totally taken off SSI for a few months. It all seemed to start from, or be hinged on two things. One is that at his school, he was working an hour a week, some weeks, and so just 1 hour, minimum wage. But that variation meant that SSI kept seeing everything as different. The other thing is that when he moved into the SLS home where he is living, he, it's a 4-bedroom home, but he moved in first, just himself. And so living in, because, and this is a warning for other families, really. Everybody has to move in at the same time, otherwise you get dinged. Because the rent was considered to be too low for a 4-bedroom house. And that was the hidden thing they never notified us of, and it caused problems years later. So anyway, word of warning. If you're doing a multiple shared living, everybody has to go in at the same time. Or you lose SSI. I mean, you can do it, but you lose your SSI eventually, years later.
Good to know. Questions? Any other questions? And I do want to note that we do have a couple other legislative staff. We're lucky enough to have them today. Sherry McCoy is back. She's one of our legislative liaisons from Senator Skinner's office. And then we have a brand new legislative staffer from Assemblymember Buffy Wick's office. And we are thrilled that you're here. And if you have anything to add to this discussion, I'll hand over the mic. Anything to add?
I'll just say, I think they've given a wonderful presentation. Here, thank you.
I think you guys have given a wonderful presentation, and thank you very much for doing that. I will echo something that you said on the federal level to the state level, that coming in with multiple groups and coming in together and kind of having, for lack of a better word, sort of act together, just all be saying the same thing, works much better than a group coming in. And then some people think that if you have groups, over multiple days or weeks or whatever, they're getting more impact because there's a reminder. But actually having more people coming in, more groups, saying the same thing, bringing up the same issues is actually more impactful. And so it's just a reminder to you. And I will also, I have a sister with special needs. Social Security is at times very difficult. They send her notices about things. Well, she's not capable of handling the notices. One time we went in and they said, I said, well, they said, you should have notified her of that. I said, well, where did you send the notice? Oh, we sent it to her. Well, she lives independently, but she doesn't really live independently. She gets a lot of family support. But of course, she never passed along this notice. And it's sort of like, there are problems with Social Security that are their own problems. They create these problems for people with special needs is what they do. So, anyhow, so it's always good to have somebody who's always on top of it from Social Security perspective.
Thank you, Sherry. I know I'm putting you on the spot. Thank you very much. You might as well jump in.
Absolutely. You guys have done a great job explaining the process. Just one advice to the group. I came from, I spent over 14 years as a social worker, so I've been in this environment for over 20 years as an advocate. So one of the things that I would advise as somebody who came from organizing background is to organize. You have to organize, you have to really put some pressures if you really want something done. You have to organize and keep knocking on the doors and keep pushing the buttons. And usually the door will open. And if it doesn't open, you knock it down. So that's where I came from. And so you have to organize and push things, and usually good things happen. So, but you guys have done a great job, so I think to add on to it.
Thank you. Consider this an official invitation to be a legislative liaison to the council. Any other questions?
First of all, I'd like to say that I
I fully agree with everything that Eric Swalwell does. And I've had several issues over the past since he's been in office, for sure. And what I like about it is the fact that apparently he has certain people that are experts at solving this problem. And maybe the next person solves something different, but it's still, what do you call it? It's still experts on whatever subject they like, I guess, is how it works. And I like that, because then you can get to the point right away, instead of, well, you gotta see so-and-so instead. I really like that, and I think Eric Swalwell is going someplace someday.
Thank you. So within our staff, we have, so I handle issues with Social Security Administration, Medicare, the IRS. Okay, so I had, okay. Got it.
My oldest son never got his new Medi-Cal card. And he had his old
I remember that, yeah. Sorry, I don't remember it off the top of my head. As you can imagine, we still lots of phone calls throughout the day.
Well, everybody in California who is eligible for Medicare, they're all taken care of. Well, my oldest son wasn't. He never got the others did. And I like that idea of, you specialize in something, you specialize in this different thing.
Thank you.
I think Wandra has another question.
The question I have is, as you were stating that there are various people in your office that specialize in certain areas. I was wondering whether or not in your office you have a comparable, for instance, your specialty and other specialties. Perhaps, Sandy, they could send that to you. I'm sorry to give you extra work, Sandy.
No.
So that the council will know these contact people and their specialties, so that when we have a need instead of asking you to filter it through, we know the contact in both your offices, not just him, you too. And I'm sorry for pointing. So if you could tell me your specialty, and also whether or not when there are bills or legislative action that you take in California, do you also look to see whether or not on a federal level there's something comparable, so that you would have more of an effect with that? Because in California, it appears as if, in a lot of cases, we start things first here. And so I was just wondering whether or not that was also done.
Right, our office is structured like that, where different people handle different issues. And sometimes California will work with the federal government. A lot of times, we'll pass a bill that impacts California, and if it's a good idea, then maybe Congressman Swalwell's office will take it up to the national level, and that's so rather than direct collaboration. It's usually a little more separate than that.
I don't think you need a mic, Dina. Oh, you do? Here.
What I'm concerned about is that, is the cards changing for the Medicare and Medi-Cal? Are they changing?
So Medicare cards have, and you should have received the new, well, you should have received your new card already. I believe all of California's should have been rolled out already. If you haven't, let me know. I can reach out to CMS, see about your Medicare card. What they've done is, your Medicare cards used to have your Social Security number on them to try to help protect people's privacy as they're handing out their Medicare card. They replaced that Social Security number with your Medicare, with an individual Medicare number.
I was just curious, will Medi-Cal get affected too?
that I'm aware of.
Do they change cards too?
They actually changed cards a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the cards are changing, but if they are, I'll let you know.
Any other questions? Well, this has been so extremely helpful. Thank you very much.